Morning, everybody. Welcome to the workshop final briefings. I'm sitting here in the International Affairs building in my classroom, but since I have none of my group is with me, I'm abandoning my mask until somebody arrives. But anyway, welcome everybody. Um, First, I want to describe what you're going to hear today. This is the culmination of 2 semesters of work of 5 groups that have been working in a management simulation, taking a statute that's been proposed but not yet enacted, and over the course of the summer, learning more about the program and the bill and the problem and communicating the science of the problem and the proposed solution. And then this semester, making the assumption that the bill had somehow miraculously passed and was signed into law by the President of the United States. And then we need to plan the implementation of this program starting on January 1st. We've been involved in a learning by doing exercise since June, engaged in learning about these issues in great detail, learning how to work in teams and how to communicate science and how to break a huge complex problem down into practical real world problems. And so I'm very excited about the results of what our teams have come up with. And we're going to begin our final briefings by hearing from Professor Rosen's group, which will be talking about advancing emergency preparedness through the One Health Act of 2019. So Professor Rosen's briefer is available. Let's begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Nababi, and today I will be presenting the final briefing for HR 3771, Advancing Emergency Preparedness through One Health Act of 2019. I'd like to thank my team members for all of their hard work, our managers Cecilia Magos and Mehek Agrawal, as well as our faculty advisor Louise Rosen for their guidance. I'll be going over the first year of implementation for this bill. In order to illustrate the first year of the One Health Act, I will first discuss the issue of zoonotic disease, then give detail about the One Health approach. I'll follow that with an explanation of the One Health Act of 2019, logistics of the bill, and finish with anticipated impacts of the first year. COVID-19 is an example of a zoonotic disease. A zoonotic disease develops and spreads from animals to humans and then spreads among other humans. Zoonotic disease outbreak is not uncommon and will not be slowing down anytime soon. Other common examples of zoonotic diseases are H1N1, Lyme's disease, avian flu, salmonella, MERS, and rabies. According to the CDC, 75% of new emerging diseases will be of zoonotic origin. Factors leading to increased vector pathways are the result of climate change. Activities such as deforestation and expanding human society through things like suburbanization and road development put us more at risk of disease contraction. Proximity to animals through trade for things like materials and food sources also increase the risk of zoonotic disease development. These activities all lead to increased interaction between humans and animals, which in turn increases the likelihood of a pathogen crossing between them, and then spreading between other humans. As you can see, zoonotic disease outbreaks are directly linked to ongoing and increasing anthropogenic activity. The understanding of the relationship between humans, animals, and the environment is not new. Elements of the One Health approach have been in development in the United States from as early as the 1940s, being further refined and eventually recommended as a response to the 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic outbreak. The basis of this approach is multi-agency collaboration, both within one country and internationally. This extends to the 3 pillars of prevention, preparation, and response through policy that builds on the relationship between humans and the world around us. Examples of activities using the One Health approach include policy regarding food safety and security, as well as disease surveillance during an outbreak. The One Health approach is at the heart of the One Health Act of 2019 and acts as a guide to future planning and decision-making for the government, ensuring that anticipated solutions to zoonotic outbreak is more than waiting for a vaccine. Since the H1N1 pandemic was declared over in 2010, there have been at least 37 other known zoonotic disease outbreaks from the US alone. As such, there is a need for specific legislation to address the increasing risk of outbreak at its roots. Advancing Emergency Preparedness through One Health Act was brought to the House floor in July 2019 by Senator Kurt Schrader with the intent to provide a long-term plan to handle zoonotic disease outbreak using the One Health approach. The first year of implementation is integral to organizing government coordination and activity for anticipated zoonotic disease emergence. The development of a One Health framework is the primary goal for the first year and sets the stage for the next 9. Key objectives towards the framework development include establishment of interagency collaboration, including federal agencies working together with local and regional partners to improve functional efficiency and equity. These goals will serve as the groundwork toward preventing, preparing for, and responding to future zoonotic disease outbreak. Holistic activities such as coordinated data reporting and capacity building will be possible because of overlapping work between government agencies and other relevant groups. The One Health Act of 2019 serves as a long-standing resource in order to act swiftly when the next zoonotic disease emerges. The development of the framework as the pinnacle of the first year will define the actions and capacity available for the following 9 years of implementation. To develop the One Health framework in the first year, strong and clear avenues of communication must be established. The creation of a federal steering committee to oversee all operations will act as a centralized network for decisions related to zoonotic disease outbreak through interagency collaboration. This committee will be led by the secretaries of HHS and the USDA as the 2 chairs. 9 other federal agencies with influence in spheres related to zoonotic disease prevention will be a part of the steering committee as members. Additionally, 4 permanent new hires and a contractor will be hired, including a program officer, an assistant program officer, an administrative assistant, and a financial manager as part of the administrative staff. Collaborating in the efforts of the steering committee, a performance management officer will be hired in the beginning of the 3rd quarter and will be responsible for monitoring the progress of the steering committee. Members from the steering committee departments will then designate a representative into one of 3 subcommittees dedicated to prevention, preparation, and response. These subcommittees will work together with other leadership representatives from state governments, tribal nations, medical professionals, and community leaders for the first year to achieve research, communication, and equitable planning at every level of interagency. For example, a subcommittee dedicated to response during a zoonotic disease outbreak may be tasked with planning for testing site implementation and capacity. Part of this duty is to ensure that communities that are disproportionately affected get the assistance and alleviation they need. Agencies with existing One Health capabilities, such as the CDC, could lead an operation with guidance from community leaders and financial planners to effectively respond to an outbreak. After the development of the steering committee, existing One Health activities must be identified in order to develop the framework as efficiently as possible. Program specialists serving as policy experts from existing One Health offices will perform this work for those agencies and report to their One Health directors after conducting a landscape analysis of their agency's existing efforts. In addition, they will provide recommendations for the framework's expansion. These reports will then be submitted to the committee's program officer. Agencies without a One Health office will hire a consultant at the recommendation of the Federal Steering Committee for 1 year. These consultants will be installed within each of these agencies and will perform the landscape analysis, then draft and submit a recommendation report to be delivered to the program committee officer. The first year of operation will cost approximately $3 million. The majority of this budget is dedicated to overhead costs and contingency funds for the first year. Additionally, a portion of this budget is allocated toward the hiring of 4 staff at the start of quarter 1. The first year of the One Health Act of 2019 is implemented in phases that are guided by output requirements as benchmarks in order to develop the One Health framework. The expected outcome of the initial phase includes the formation of the steering committee and subcommittees, as well as the hiring of consultants. Phase 2 will encompass a landscape analysis of each agency to expand One Health activities. Performance will be judged based on the subsequent report submissions to program officers within this time and evaluation of those findings. Phase 3 performance management will focus on the One Health framework draft being submitted and for quality of the framework's adjustment of the core components to the One Health approach. The 4th phase will see final revisions to the framework to be evaluated by the official submission of the One Health framework to Congress for publication. The 5th and final phase will be dedicated to implementing the entire framework, creating addendums and updating the progress on different agencies over the next 9 years, as stated in the bill. The first year of implementation for HR 3771, Advancing Emergency Preparedness through One Health Act of 2019, is critical to the following 9 years of execution. The development of the Federal Steering Committee at the beginning of the first year will allow for proactive action toward prevalent zoonotic disease, rather than waiting to respond to an existing public health threat. Structured organization will strengthen federal planning and response in areas related to zoonotic disease spillover. Interagency collaboration will then streamline communication in the development of the One Health framework in the first year. In turn, this will make health planning for zoonotic disease prevention, preparation, and response as efficient and comprehensive as possible. Finally, the first year of implementation will end with the full development of the One Health framework, rebuilding the federal government's ability to modernize, strategize, and provide a strong response in the case of another pandemic outbreak. In an article co-authored by Dr. Anthony Fauci in January of this year, the importance of sustained preparedness in the face of zoonotic disease outbreak was emphasized as the world waited to see what would happen with the novel coronavirus. We have learned that 1 year of an out-of-control pandemic can push a country's infrastructure to its limits if nothing is done. The One Health Act of 2019 aims to establish protocols and guidelines to avoid more public health disasters in the long term. The first year of implementation provides the essential principles of prevention, preparation, and response for the ongoing threat of zoonotic disease. Thank you, and I can now take any questions.
Thank you, Maya. Stephanie, can you recognize if people are asking questions?
Yes, you guys can raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can type it in the chat. All right, we have a question from the CAS room.
Hi, Maya, this is Rachel. Great presentation. I was really interested in your steering committee of 9 agencies.
So the administrative staff is going to be working between the 9 agencies and the secretaries of the USDA and HHS as far as kind of managing what everyone is doing. So that's, they're, I suppose, like the liaison to making sure everything stays organized and is going as planned. And then your other question was the program officer at the start of Q3, I believe. They'll be hired just to make sure everything is going along the timeline and making sure that every job is getting done.
Cool, thanks.
Jenny, did you have a question?
Yes. Hi, great job, Maya. I was wondering if you could share more about the process for working to protect the most vulnerable communities you mentioned, and how collaboration, I think you mentioned, with tribal nations and other communities will work.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we all know that, you know, these kinds of public health threats don't affect everyone equally, unfortunately. And so I think with subcommittees focused on prevention, preparation, and response, they can integrate leaders from different communities that are hard hit more than others in order to kind of make sure that these communities are getting what they need. So for prevention, that might be looking at systemic reasons why, you know, certain underlying conditions are there, or why, what kind of infrastructural changes need to be made. Whereas preparation might be making sure that there's materials in these areas, or there's medical coverage in those communities as well. So integrating leaders from tribal nations and communities is really important to make sure that their voices are being heard within this process.
Other questions?
Any additional questions? Oh, we have a question from Alyssa. She was wondering if you found any similarities in this bill to the Obama-era Pandemic Preparedness and Response Act.
Yeah, a lot of the One Health framework is actually based on how, I think particularly the US responded to the H1N1 pandemic outbreak. This I think goes a little bit further as far as prevention goes. And as far as what was developed after the H1N1 outbreak, so Obama's playbook, as he's mentioned, this is less of just a response plan and more of how do we stop this from happening at the roots? How do we make sure that what we're doing stops these diseases from emerging at such a high rate?
Okay, thank you very much, Maya. Thank you to the group for excellent work over the course of the last 2 semesters. We'll focus on the Agricultural Resilience Act, and it is Alyssa Ramirez who will be giving the briefing. Take it away.
All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to share with you the work our team has focused on pertaining to the implementation of the Agriculture Resilience Act. My name is Alyssa Ramirez, and I'll be your briefer today. But I want to thank the team for the phenomenal work that they've done throughout the term to put this together, as well as our faculty advisor, Matt Palmer, for his advice and guidance. We'll start by looking at the problem. The agriculture sector is a large contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, but is also impacted negatively by climate change. The Agriculture Resilience Act aims to address some of these issues, such as soil degradation and the loss of soil organic matter that reduces carbon storage and degrades soil health, the release of methane and carbon dioxide from livestock and manure, and more broadly, climate vulnerability and the threat to agriculture production from a changing climate. I'll start by presenting the case of Cedar Mountain Farm and how they work to address some of these issues. When the farm owners purchased the property in 1999, the forage and soil health on the dairy pasture was severely degraded, which hindered its ability to sequester carbon. This Vermont farm has remediated its once damaged soil through farmland preservation. Farm owner Kelly Gewalt and her husband Stephen Leslie had worked with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, a division of the USDA, to implement sustainable agriculture practices. And after consulting with a Vermont NRCS grazing specialist, they were able to receive financial and technical assistance distributed under the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, which focuses on funding on-farm improvements, soil amendment programs, and providing field-based technical assistance. In this particular instance, the approach was to install tensile fencing to designate prescribed grazing areas for livestock. So you can see here the livestock passing between designated pastures fenced on either side to allow vegetation to grow between grazing periods. In conjunction, a covered manure storage system, as well as cover crops work to improve the soil. Focusing on the broader goals, the Agriculture Resilience Act aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and to reach net zero emissions by 2040. Though this is ambitious, the goal is to bolster efforts leading to a more sustainable food system. In addition to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, if passed, the bill increases federal investment in research and education efforts in the sector, in addition to the implementation of new programs on soil health, livestock waste, emission reduction, food waste mitigation, and on-farm renewable energy. Pardon me. To address the aforementioned issues, we chose to model two specific programs mentioned in the bill as an example, but I wanted to note that the bill itself is quite robust with many programs within it. One program that we focused on is alternative manure management, and the other on private grazing land management. We spoke extensively with Vermont NRCS staff and thus have used the state as our prototype for the deployment of these services, but the programs will be national with similar implementation plans developed for the other states. We'll highlight the organizational planning strategies of both programs, beginning with the Alternative Manure Management Program. This program will subsidize livestock manure methane management strategies in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This can include technology such as slatted flooring pictured here, which are used for the as waste pits for the collection and storage of manure to be later used for composting to reintegrate valuable nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus into the soil. The implementation of this program will increase accessibility for farmers to make on-farm changes by adding staff and grant money to allow new or previously participating farms to make more substantial transitions towards sustainable strategies. This program will consist of 4 staff members, 1 agriculture engineer supervisor, 1 assistant for field operations, 1 administrative support staff member, and 1 grant technician. The grant technician shall serve as support for both programs. Accounting for staff expenses and grants brings the estimated total budget to $1,050,000. In order to determine program progress, the agriculture engineer will track several different measurements throughout the program deployment, including the annual number of grant applications and the number of new projects, the amount of money awarded, the adherence to the budget, avoided methane emissions, and the impact on the constructed environment of the surrounding ecosystem. These metrics will be tracked regularly in a data management tool by the agriculture engineer and their supporting team, and an analysis of the tracked data will be performed annually to allow for regular updates and potential shifts in program outreach and metrics. Transitioning to our second program, the Private Grazing Land Management Program functions to improve soil health through techniques such as conversion from confined facilities to rotational grazing management or prescribed grazing management. This can reduce overgrazing, can keep forage healthy, improve soil biota, and increase vegetation productivity, making soils more resilient to climate change. This program will consist of 3 staff members, 1 rangeland management specialist, 1 grazing land management specialist, and 1 administrative support staff member. The private grazing land program will receive support from the staff member identified in the alternative manure management program. And the total budget for this program, including staff expenses and grants, totals $350,000. To measure program progress, the program will monitor the number of grant applications and enrolled farmers, the program's adherence to the budget, the quantity of carbon sequestered, and the impact on ecosystem services. To determine the carbon metrics, samples will be collected by NRCS field officers and then sent to analytical labs. In order to evaluate the impact that the private grazing land program has on greenhouse gas emissions, soil will be tested once at the beginning of the grant agreement and annually after. Both programs follow a similar implementation process. When farmers initially apply for technical and/or financial assistance under EQIP, a field officer deploys to assess the unique needs of the farm. To determine carbon metrics, soil samples will be collected to identify the existing state of the soil health. The appropriate specialist to each program would then make assessments based on soil data and provide recommendations to the farm regarding advised management strategies. During this phase, grant money would be dispersed. After grant money is dispersed, implementation will commence and periodic progress review will occur. In the case of the alternative manure management program, an agriculture engineer will appraise infrastructure for manure capture and storage. And lastly, phase 4 will consist of the integration of feedback and the measurement of success. A soil surveyor will collect samples on an annual basis to monitor the impacts and improvements that the program has on soil health. And lastly, reports will be sent up the chain of command to the state conservationist for review. Unfortunately, the USDA, which manages the NRCS, has a long history of prejudicial treatment with dispersal of financial and technical assistance. It is vital for the dispersal of grants to promote outreach and partnerships across diverse groups. Therefore, the demographics of grant awardees must be measured, and representation of NRCS offices must also be diverse and inclusive. There will be an annual analysis to allow for feedback on how well these programs and the NRCS is doing in meeting these requirements. Although our budget calculations were for the state of Vermont as our prototype, the bill is national, and similar expansions will occur in the other state offices that are proportional to the percentage of funding that they receive for similar programs. On the national scale, the private grazing land program and the alternative manure management program equate to 50 million and 150 million respectively for each fiscal year from 2021 to 2030. Ultimately, the design of these programs would aim to improve soil carbon sequestration rates, reduce emissions in the agriculture sector, and move towards more sustainable strategies in the US overall. The overarching goals proposed in the Agriculture Resilience Act are included in President-elect Biden's climate change plans, demonstrating that these ideals are becoming part of a broader political framework, allowing for optimism that we will see continued action towards these objectives in the future. Thank you. I'll now take any questions.
Very nice job, Alyssa. Congratulations to your group. Stephanie, do we have any questioners?
So you guys can raise your hand. Great, we have two. So Alina, let me unmute you. All right, you should be able to talk. Great.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful and very impressive presentation. So I was wondering whether there would be any additional obstacles for implementing the program.
Yeah, I mean, you can always, make contingency plans, and things will always be, thrown into the plan that'll, that you'll have to adapt to. Certain obstacles, I would say, are variable types of things, such as measuring some of the metrics. So, for example, soil health. There might be some things that that maybe skew some of the soil health data that's collected. For example, if there was a local event such as a drought or extreme freeze, those are things that are going to be reflected in the soil health. So things like that are certainly difficulties that we would have to overcome. I would say another obstacle would be getting farmers to get on board with the broader goals of the bill. A lot of farmers might have, certain management practices in place, and changing from those can be first very costly, a huge risk, to the farmers and their investment. And so, yeah, I would say those are probably some of the problems that we would foresee.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question from Karen.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Alyssa. I have a quick question. I really appreciated your explanation of how you're going to be checking on the quantity of carbon sequestered and tracking that, but I was wondering how you're going to be tracking the methane emissions.
Yeah, I am personally not really familiar with the actual measurement of methane emissions in the soil. The types of the scientific background that goes into it. I would say that it is something that is monitored by the soil conservationists. But yeah, I would say that is something that certainly is difficult to measure.
Okay. Any other questions, Stephanie?
Last call for questions. Oh, Professor Jocelyn, hang on, let me unmute you. All right.
Great. Thanks very much, Alyssa. It's a great presentation. I wondered how much this bill incorporates the existing cooperative extension agents as perhaps some of those specialists that you are drawing upon.
I'm sorry?
Is there any, I wondered whether the USDA has cooperative extension agents, and I was curious whether they are part of the framework of this bill.
Yeah, they do. There is a substantial component of the bill that focuses on expanding research, research and education, and working with like universities is certainly something that would be a relationship that is beneficial to to the research, and I would say certainly partnerships with universities. I would say local organizations as well, to take into account those priorities for for small farmers, for farm workers. So yeah, I would say it is sort of an aggregate of a lot of different agencies that would benefit to the implementation, and to hearing multiple voices that are an important component of our agriculture system.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa, and thank you to the group for an excellent presentation. Next briefing is on the Wildlife Conservation and Anti-Trafficking Act, and the presenter is Allison Day, representing the group advised by Professor Hill. Allison, take it away.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Day, and today I am presenting on behalf of my team to talk about the work we've been doing this year with the Wildlife Conservation and Anti-Trafficking Act of 2019. Wildlife trafficking, to start, is the illegal gathering, transportation, and distribution of animals and their parts, such as their horns, skin, and bones. It has local and regional markets where the poaching happens, as well as international markets where the products are distributed. The industry developed due to a demand for wildlife products for things like trophy hunting, medicine, and jewelry, among other reasons. Scientists believe that poaching is currently leading, or contributing to the 6th mass extinction of animals on Earth that we're currently experiencing. And the animals below here, the pangolins, tigers, and elephants, are prime examples of animals that are facing extinction because of illegal wildlife trafficking. So pangolins are captured and boiled alive for their meat and scales. Tigers are hunted for their pelts, bones, and claws, which can be used in traditional medicine, or they're captured and sold as pets. And elephants are killed for their tusks, which can be trophies or used in ivory carvings. So these are some of the more charismatic animals that are threatened by wildlife trafficking, but the problem also extends to birds, fish, plants, and insects as well. So when people think of wildlife trafficking, they usually think of the impacts that it has on animal populations, but there are also a lot of impacts for humans as well. The illegal wildlife trade is almost the same scope and scale as the international illegal drug trade. However, it's difficult to estimate the exact size of the industry because of its illegal nature, but it is estimated that the illegal wildlife trafficking industry is as large as $23 billion each year and growing. Additionally, ecosystems don't function as well when animals are taken out of them, and humans aren't able to benefit from the services that these ecosystems would provide if they were functioning healthy. So an example of that is if elephants were to go extinct, there would be a huge loss of money from tourism and from the non-economic value that elephants can contribute to their ecosystem. And this does not include the cost of diseases that jump from animals to humans, called zoonotic diseases. That often happens during the illegal wildlife trade. Lastly, organized crime and terrorist groups are often involved in illegal trafficking, and that creates a space for corruption and violence, especially in developing nations. So wildlife trafficking is a global problem, but the US wants to address it because the US is one of the largest consumers of illegally trafficked wildlife products. Additionally, the illegal trade hurts American interests, especially regarding fisheries, because US fisheries can't compete with illegally harvested seafood. So the Wildlife Conservation Anti-Trafficking Act of 2019 isn't going to completely stop illegal wildlife trafficking, but it is a step in the right direction to help us solve this problem. So the bill has two main objectives. The first is to reduce wildlife trafficking rates in foreign countries, and the second is to provide for the conservation of endangered species. To accomplish this first objective, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will send special agents abroad to wildlife trafficking hotspots in other countries, and also work to incentivize whistleblowers to come forward with information on illegal trafficking operations and reward them with monetary rewards. And for the conservation side of this, the fines from violations of other conservation legislation can be used for the enforcement of fisheries and for the conservation of endangered species. So by sending the Fish and Wildlife agents abroad, this actually helps with both objectives because we're considering the work that the agents are doing as conservation work, even though it's technically anti-trafficking enforcement. Because we reason that if you have fewer people, fewer traffickers threatening endangered species, then those programs that work directly with the species for conservation will be a lot more successful in the long run. Additionally, this function of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service helps us to unlock a revenue stream built into the bill that I'll talk about in a few more slides. So while abroad, the Fish and Wildlife Special Agents will be responsible for reducing demand in their host countries and assisting in investigations into wildlife trafficking cases. So the places that these wildlife products are harvested is not always where they're consumed. So the degree to which the agents assist with reducing demand will depend on the country that they're assigned to. Additionally, an important part is that the agents will learn about the cultural significance of some of these illegally trafficked wildlife products to come up with culturally sensitive ways to reduce demand for them. The agents will also host workshops through the International Law Enforcement Academy, where they will train foreign law enforcement officials in best practices for illegal wildlife trafficking investigations. These workshops are a really important part of this bill because they have a multiplying effect on the efforts that the agents are already putting in to combat wildlife trafficking. And to illustrate this, an example is that last year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service hosted a workshop at the International Law Enforcement Academy campus in Bangkok, where they trained 29 officials from 6 different countries in best practices for investigations, with the idea that these officials will take that knowledge back to their home countries and apply it there. And lastly, the agents will be encouraging potential whistleblowers to come forward with information that can help in wildlife investigations. Whistleblowing is a really important part of these kinds of investigations because they can speed them up and also help to lead to convictions. And a good example of this is in 2014, a mail courier informed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service of an illegal reptile trafficking ring between the U.S. and Hong Kong. And that tip led to the indictment of 6 people and the forfeiture of $24,000 in shipments of live Asian leaf turtles. And the picture here is of one of those turtles with its legs taped down to be transported. For providing this useful information, the mail courier was rewarded $5,000. And under the bill, there would be a new rule that guarantees money for whistleblowers, because up until now, it has not been a guarantee that contributing information will result in a reward. And a big part is that this rule will be widely publicized so that it really encourages people to come forward with information that can help in these investigations. In the first year of implementing this bill, we are sending Fish and Wildlife agents to Mozambique, South Africa, India, Laos, and Vietnam. These are known illegal trafficking hotspots, and they struggle especially with the conservation of rhinos, tigers, and elephants. And in following years, we will send more agents to countries that are experiencing similar problems. The total budget for the first year to send the agents abroad and to provide for the monetary rewards to whistleblowers is $4 million. The bill is designed to work without taxpayer money or appropriations because it has a revenue stream built into it. And this revenue stream uses money collected from fines of certain conservation legislation to be put, it puts that money toward the goals in the bill. And since we're considering the work that, as I mentioned earlier, we're considering the work that the agents are doing as conservation work so that we can tap into this revenue stream. In terms of measuring success, illegal trafficking is very difficult to measure because it is illegal. But there are a few methods for collecting data that we can use sort of as proxies to determine if the actions in the bill are having the desired impact. So first, we can survey participants from the International Law Enforcement Academy workshops to see if the information that they're learning at those workshops has been useful to them in investigations in their home country. Second, we can compile reports from investigations into wildlife trafficking cases to see if the investigations are becoming more or less successful. We can also collect reports from on whistleblower engagement from NGOs like the National Whistleblower Center to see if more people are coming forward with information they can help in these investigations. And lastly, we can compare the size of trafficked species populations from before the implementation of the bill to after to see if these populations of animals are growing. So the first three metrics here are really more measures of short-term success and short-term impacts, and those can be evaluated after the first year of implementing the bill. But for the size of the trafficked animal populations, that's really more of a long-term measure. So that would have to be revisited after a couple of years of this bill being enacted. So as we've seen here, there's a lot of different components to this bill and for how it will reduce trafficking rates. But a good example to illustrate how all this works together, how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife works with foreign governments and NGOs to enforce anti-trafficking is Operation Cobra 2. This operation took place in 2014 and involved the coordination and intelligence sharing between 28 different countries, including the United States. And it resulted in the arrest of 400 wildlife traffickers and the seizure of thousands of illegal wildlife products across Asia and Africa. So the Wildlife Conservation Anti-Trafficking Act would help to facilitate more of these kinds of international operations by placing the Fish and Wildlife agents directly where the trafficking is happening. This allows them to work with local governments and to gather intelligence on the ground. So to sum this all up, the illegal wildlife trafficking, illegal wildlife trade is a widespread problem, and this bill really only scratches the surface of what's necessary to tackle this problem. But the ability to work cooperatively with other governments and to engage communities through working with whistleblowers will allow the United States through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to devote the time and resources needed to take a step in the direction to save these beloved species. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and thank my team and our advisor, Professor Hill, for their valuable feedback in making this presentation. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Allison. Excellent presentation. Stephanie, do we have any questioners questioning?
Yes, we have a question from Louisa.
Okay.
Let me unmute you. All right.
Hi, Allison. Great presentation. Loved it. I just have a quick question about why you decided to choose these first year focus countries that you did. I think you mentioned Mozambique.
Yeah, so a couple of things went into choosing those countries. So the bill has some guidelines for how to choose them. It refers to the Eliminate, Neutralize, and Disrupt Wildlife Trafficking Act of 2016. It's also called the End Wildlife Trafficking Act. That bill has a list of focus countries that are ones where they're struggling with conservation of a couple different species. So we wanted to look at that because we had to choose some countries from that list, but we also wanted to see more specifically what kind of animals these countries were struggling with. So we looked at the World Wildlife Fund's Wildlife Crime Scorecard, it's a mouthful. And that assesses how different countries in Asia and Africa are doing with the conservation of rhinos, tigers, and elephants. And a third part is that with the revenue stream that I mentioned in the bill, that money from that can only come from violations of 3 different acts. It's the African Elephant Conservation Act, the Rhinoceros and Tiger Conservation Act, and the Endangered Species Act. So when we were choosing the countries we wanted to send agents to in the first year, we wanted them to be, this is probably not the right word, but like lucrative countries. So ones that were, there would probably be a lot of violations of those 3 acts that I mentioned so that they could generate the most amount of revenue in the first year, because then that money can be used to further implement the bill in the second year. So because those 5 countries that I mentioned had to do with rhinos, tigers, and yeah, they had trouble with rhinos, tigers, and elephants, we wanted to send agents to those countries. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Oh, you might be muted. Never mind.
Thank you, Al.
Carol has a question.
Hi, Allison. Nice presentation. I'm wondering that for the officers that you're stationed abroad, do you have any diplomatic concerns that might occur?
Yeah, so that's something that we talked about in our group extensively. The presence of U.S. officers in another country could be kind of seen as like infringing on their country's sovereignty, but really what these agents are doing is they're not affecting the governance in this country at all. So that's in action, this is not really a concern. What these agents are doing is they're just helping to enforce these international agreements that the countries have already signed on to, such as CITES, which is the, it's a very long name, it's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And there's a lot of countries that are signed on to it. So these agents are really just helping to enforce this, these agreements that the countries are already signing on to.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Stephanie?
Any other questions? Carol, did you have another question? Okay. I think that's it.
All right. Well, Allison, thank you for a great presentation, and thank you to your group for an excellent couple of semesters. So the next group operated under the difficulty of having to be advised by me over the past couple of semesters, but nevertheless, they've done an excellent job, as you'll hear from Jenny Bach, talking about the Department of Defense Climate Resiliency and Readiness Act. So Jenny, if you're ready, let's get started.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Bach, and today I will present a plan for how the military can be a leader in combating the climate crisis through the enactment of 2759 Department of Defense Climate Resiliency and Readiness Act, also known as the DoD Climate Act. I will start by discussing the problems the bill aims to address. Second, I will review the main mandates of the bill, and I will then discuss what we aim to achieve in the first year of enactment and how we will implement this plan. So this is an image of Hurricane Michael heading toward Florida's Panhandle on October 10, 2018. It struck as a Category 5 hurricane with 155 miles per hour winds. Hurricane Michael ended up being the fourth largest hurricane to ever make landfall in the US. Damages from the hurricane were significant. It flattened neighborhoods, caused disastrous flooding. Sorry, one too soon. It caused disastrous flooding and displaced many people. Tyndall Air Force Base, one of the largest Air Force bases in the US, was directly in the path of the hurricane. And it's estimated Hurricane Michael cost the DoD and the American taxpayer almost $5 billion in damages. The storm damaged or destroyed every building on base. Despite these high damage costs, the Air Force actually said that the hurricane created an opportunity to completely redesign the base and make it more resilient to future climate impacts. Extreme weather events such as Hurricane Michael are becoming more severe and frequent due to climate change, and the consequences of this pattern are evident throughout the DoD. As shown in this image, over 1,700 US military installations are reporting multiple climate risks, including sea level rise and extreme weather, all of which pose urgent operational and financial risks for the DoD. In just 2 years, damage from hurricanes cost the DoD $8.6 billion. And the DoD itself is also significantly contributing to the climate crisis through its emissions. It is the world's 55th largest greenhouse gas emitter, with emissions larger than Portugal, Sweden, or Denmark. Thus, the DoD needs to both adapt to the climate crisis and mitigate its own role in it. And delaying action to address climate change is fundamentally unjust, as the burdens and costs of climate change are unevenly distributed, disproportionately impacting low-income communities of color. So it's important to note that the DoD already recognizes climate change as a serious problem and has actually been working on renewable energy and resiliency projects for a number of years. But the idea is this work needs to be escalated, and the DoD Climate Act, introduced by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, is the key legislation that will help achieve this outcome. The DoD Climate Act has 3 goals. First, the bill requires all non-combat installations to improve energy efficiency and achieve net zero energy consumption by 2030. Second, the DoD must assess and manage the physical risks climate change poses to its installations. And third, the bill seeks to decarbonize economic markets surrounding the defense industry. Our program prioritizes, or to start by implementing these solutions, we design a program for the first year of enactment of the bill. And our program prioritizes climate mitigation to get at the root problem of reducing the DoD's large greenhouse gas emissions and immediately works towards achieving net zero energy. The program creates a uniform process for how the DoD assesses and adapts to climate risks. And the program also implements institutional changes for how the DoD manages climate-related work. Prioritizing mitigation in the first year, our program will focus on transitioning to renewable energy, researching and developing energy storage technology, and decreasing energy consumption. The DoD's greenhouse gas emissions account for 77% of the federal government's emissions, so ensuring energy efficiency and military bases will massively reduce the US carbon footprint overall. And the DoD is already building hybrid microgrids, as you can see in the photo. Our program will help scale up this work and increase the development of microgrids that use 100% renewable energy. Working towards the DoD's net zero energy goal in the first year, which is defined net zero energy as non-combat bases producing as much renewable energy as they consume, will help bring renewable energy technology to economies of scale, incentivize private sector competition and innovation, and in turn, help decarbonize US markets. We recognize and are utilizing the DoD's status as an economic driver to strategically transform the energy economy and create large-scale change. Considering the urgent and immediate threat of extreme weather events, climate risk-based planning at military bases is necessary to protect national security and the operational capacity of the DoD. In the first year, we will create a new climate vulnerability assessment tool to be used by bases to assess and implement adaptation efforts to fortify military bases against climate hazards. This will include identifying the top 10 most at-risk installations in each military branch. The DoD's resiliency work has widespread support across the government and military and will ultimately save the DoD significant money. For every $1 spent on pre-disaster resiliency measures, the federal government saves $6. Last year, billions of dollars in damages from flooding were avoided at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska due to the simple decision to build a section of the base at higher elevation. Institutional changes we will make in the first year include hiring new positions and nominating a new assistant secretary position, establishing a fellowship program for increased diversity, and instituting more climate-conscious budgeting and contracting. Performance management will include frequent reports to measure the progress towards the major goals of the Act and track data such as greenhouse gas emissions and climate vulnerability scores. Performance management will include also measuring progress to meeting the overall goals of the Act. And we have also incorporated principles of collaboration and equity throughout the program design. Given the US military's history and power, we designed a program that will advance equity and environmental justice in how the DoD conducts work internally and externally. Section 10 of the DoD Act actually explicitly requires collaboration with communities of color, including historically Black colleges and universities and tribal nations. The program will adhere to National Environmental Policy Act requirements to conduct environmental impact assessments and provide opportunity for public participation. The program will also require research be shared with communities surrounding bases, many of which are low-income communities of color. Due to the heightened climate vulnerabilities these communities face, it is critical the DoD establish partnerships to mitigate mutually shared risks. I will now discuss how these key program elements will be implemented following enactment of the bill. The budget for the first year is $58.6 billion. While this may seem like a large number, this investment will have an enormous impact on the US economy overall and is actually only 8% of the DoD's total $700 billion annual budget. The first year budget is broken down into 3 categories, with the most investment, $40 billion, allocated to mitigation efforts, the program's key priority in the first year. The significant investment will go toward renewable energy and microgrid technology development and into immediate energy efficiency initiatives that will yield future cost savings for the DoD. In addition, we will spend $17 billion on adaptation efforts to increase the resiliency of military bases to climate impacts. And lastly, we will spend $300 million on institutional changes, including staffing and contracting. For staffing, our program starts by creating a new position, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy and Climate Resiliency, who will oversee the program's implementation. We will also hire over 300 full-time employees and approximately 3,000 contractors. We are tapping into the DoD's vast contractor network to help decarbonize the private sector by holding contractors accountable to climate-conscious contracting. This will include requirements such as contractors being charged a fee if they don't meet net zero energy requirements. We will also create a DoD Climate Fellowship program and focus on recruiting from communities of color. Lastly, we will establish a cross-government climate task force to ensure coordination between federal agencies, researchers, and impacted stakeholders. Assuming enactment on January 1st, 2021, our first major action will be to appoint the Assistant Secretary and other key positions. We will then assess key energy metrics, including energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. The Climate Vulnerability Assessment tool, which the bill mandates be created in the first year, will be ready to use by June. And by the end of the first year, we will deploy the first round of hybrid microgrid and renewable energy projects and implement energy efficiency measures across DoD bases. So this is an ambitious program with many different actors and moving parts that will have an enormous impact in addressing the climate crisis. The DoD Climate Act aims to mitigate the military's outsized greenhouse gas emissions and adapt structural assets to increase climate resiliency in order to ensure national security, all while working to equitably address the greater burden of climate change faced by vulnerable populations. The DoD already plays a crucial role in disaster response and climate resiliency through the work of the National Guard and Army Corps of Engineers. And historically, the DoD's investments in advanced technology have served as a force multiplier for the rest of the country. So in conclusion, we are very optimistic. The investments and goals set by this program will spur the innovation required to transition the US to net zero emissions and thus combat climate change on the scale this crisis necessitates. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jenny. Very nice talk. Do we have any questions?
Carson has her hand raised. Let me unmute you.
Hi, Jenny. Great job. I really enjoyed that presentation. And I can tell that you guys really prioritized equity and environmental justice into your implementation plan. And so I was just wondering if you could expand at all on how you would plan to measure that environmental justice strategy.
Yeah, thank you. So we basically the act actually requires us to really implement this, and it's more about, we thought about how to do this. And some of the measurements that we have instituted to require this, because you can have a lot of talk, but it's really about how you implement and hold yourself accountable to this work. So we have measurements in place, such as looking at the percentage of staff internally that have completed bias or anti-racism trainings, and also metrics such as the number of partnerships that have been developed with local communities and governments, and looking at the number of paid fellowships with historically Black colleges or universities or other minority serving institutions. And as I mentioned, a lot of this work will be done by contractors. So we have a measurement that looks at the number and percentage of contractors with environmental social impact management plans, looking at measuring communities impacted by contractor operations. And internally, there's already a federal government requirement across agencies that requires a certain percentage of contractors be minority or women-owned businesses. So that is some of the ways that we're going to be holding ourselves accountable to these goals.
Okay, I see Elizabeth has a question. Can we unmute her, Stephanie?
Yep.
Go
Hi.
ahead.
Great presentation, Jenny. That was really informative and clear. I just have a question about your energy efficiency versus renewable energy focus. And I noticed on your timeline, the energy efficiency seemed to come after the renewable energy. I'm not sure if I misunderstood that, but I guess my feeling would be you would do all you can with energy efficiency to then see, what's the minimum amount of renewable energy you need to put into place. And I was just wondering if you had discussed at all, like how much of these goals can be achieved through energy efficiency measures versus that renewable energy piece.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in general, we decided just to try as much as we can to reduce the enormous greenhouse gas emissions the military emits in all the ways we can the first year. And I think we were really interested in the DoD's already deployed a lot of microgrid energy projects, and they already are working on reducing energy emissions, especially in their buildings. So I think we were interested in trying to deploy a more microgrid energy, especially renewable energy projects as quickly as possible the first year, because that'll really help reduce emissions significantly. And then also I think the energy efficiency measures takes a lot of like individual measurements at different, all the different facilities to see like exactly what retrofits need to happen. And a lot of retrofit work is very building specific. So I think that's partly why we decided we wouldn't be ready to actually roll out all these energy efficiency measures till the end. But the idea is, we got to do this all as quickly as possible.
Okay, I saw somebody in room 407 with a question. Stephanie, can we unmute there?
Yes, Jenny, this is Rachel. I was wondering how long this program is funded for and what the timeline is for achieving the net zero emissions at all non-combat bases.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we plan for just 1 year of this, but obviously it'll take many years. And the net zero energy goal, the date where that has to be achieved is 2030. So we're, in 2020 and we're assuming 2021, this will start. So the idea is this will be continually funded, for the next, ideally 9 years until we achieve that goal. And in terms of, I think the DoD is kind of unique and they get as much funding really as they want. So the idea is like this can continue to be funded, until all the goals are really achieved. Yeah.
Take one more question if we have one. Anybody else raising their hand?
Not yet. 407, did you guys have more questions or you're good to go?
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well,
hang on.
no. Okay. Well, thank you, Jenny, for a terrific presentation. And again, let me congratulate the group for doing such great work over the past 2 semesters. It's been a pleasure working with you. And so, again, congratulations to all. Our final briefing will be on the Water Power Research and Development Act, advised by Professor Cass, and the briefer will be Anna Nikolova. And if we're ready, let's get started.
Good morning, classmates, faculty, and guests. I'm Anna Nikolova, and today I will be presenting the final briefing for the Water Power Advancement Technology and Training Program. I would like to thank my teammates for this task, Jessica Kenny and Catherine Lynn, our managers, Rachel Goodgall and Drew Poling, and our faculty advisor, Lloyd Cass, for their help in preparing this presentation. Through today's briefing, you will understand the rationale and implementation plan for the Water Power Advancement Technology and Training Program. First, I will present a case study for water power implementation and describe the different types of available technology. Second, I will outline their associated challenges and opportunities. Finally, I will present the design and implementation plan for the program. It starts with a vision for a better world for our kids. One where we're no longer addicted to fossil fuels, where we have transitioned in a fair way to a green economy that works for everyone. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is one of the many leaders prioritizing the energy transition by investing in hydropower. With the closure of the nuclear plant at Indian Point next year, New York City's dependence on fossil fuels for electricity is projected to increase. This reliance on oil, gas, and coal produces greenhouse gas emissions and leads to global warming. Related pollution and extreme climate events have outsized impacts on communities of color and low-income communities in New York and beyond. To avoid increasing fossil fuel use, the state has approved the $3 billion Champlain-Hudson Power Express, or CHIPPY, transmission line. CHIPPY is designed to connect the booming hydropower generation industry in Quebec, Canada, to New York City through an underground cable installation. You can see the route highlighted in red on the top left. Once completed, this project has the potential to supply 17% of the city's daily power demand and will create 2,000 New York jobs. Its budget also includes $117 million for an environmental trust fund. CHIPPY shows that hydropower can provide large-scale clean energy, and that importing power from Canada may be a missed opportunity to develop American energy resources. With proper investment, locally generated water power can spur the transition to a renewable energy system. So what is water power? The two types are hydropower and marine energy. While hydropower is well established in the US, marine energy technology is largely in the research, development, and demonstration phase. In 2019, hydropower made up just under 7% of total US electricity generation. However, this percentage varies regionally, and some states use hydro for up to 27% of their energy needs. There are three main types of hydropower technology: impoundment, diversion, and pumped storage. Electricity is produced when energy from free-falling water spins a turbine that drives a generator. Then the generator converts the motion to electrical energy for use in the mainstream grid. The photo on the left is of a diversion dam in Oregon. In contrast, marine energy technology is undeveloped at a commercial scale. Examples of marine energy are the kinetic energy from waves and tides, and the energy produced by differences in salinity and temperature gradients in the ocean. Early stage open water devices exist that can convert this energy into electricity, but are not yet connected to the mainstream grid. In the right-hand photo, you can see the testing of the wave energy converter device by the US Navy in Hawaii. If developed at scale, wave energy along the US coast has the potential to supply 64% of the country's electricity needs. Despite their great promise, there are multiple challenges preventing hydropower and marine energy from advancing. By 2020, 70% of all dams in the US will be more than 50 years old, reaching the end of their useful life. As such, they are at risk of collapse and flooding. In the photo on the left, you can see the collapsed Sanford Dam in Michigan that forced the evacuation of 10,000 people in May of this year. Another challenge associated with hydropower is the slow permitting time for new projects, upgrades, and retrofits. These approvals can currently take from 5 to 10 years. As a new technology, marine energy faces a different set of challenges. Oh, As a new technology, marine energy faces a different set of challenges to achieving utility scale. To reach the next phase of development, it will need a massive injection of capital from the public and private sectors. There are also several issues shared by both sectors. Water power is experiencing a shortage of skilled workers at every level. With the anticipated growth of this sector, these workforce needs will only increase. Additionally, Black, Indigenous, and people of color individuals, institutions, and communities are underrepresented in research and development, specifically in who receives funding and who benefits from the applied technology. The Water Power Advancement Technology and Training Program, abbreviated WAT, was created to address these challenges. The program is authorized under the Water Power Research and Development Act of 2020 to promote the research, development, demonstration, and commercial application of water power. To achieve this objective, the bill appropriates about $150 million per year for the Department of Energy's Water Power Technologies Office and for grants to National Marine Renewable Energy Centers. The WAT program represents a subset of all the Act's goals and will deploy a portion of these funds. The design of the WAT program is divided into two sections: technology advancement and training. Within technology advancement, the first objective is to improve the reliability and resiliency of existing hydropower plants. This will be accomplished by speeding up the permitting process for approval of upgrades and retrofits for dams. Second, the WAT program aims to make marine energy technology cheaper and more accessible. This will be accomplished by establishing a new dedicated university research center and by supporting existing centers. In the training section, the third objective is to grow the water power workforce through increased outreach and education activities. This will be accomplished by sponsoring and promoting internships and fellowships at all levels of the sector. The final objective is to increase equity and inclusion in research, development, demonstration, and application of water power. To reach this goal, the Water Power Technologies Office will redesign its grant-making process to award more contracts to underrepresented groups. The WAT program's ambitious objectives will require hiring additional talent. Our proposed staffing plan involves creating 4 new positions within the Department of Energy's Water Power Technologies Office. First, a liaison to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is the government entity responsible for issuing hydropower permits. The liaison will work in consultation with the Commission's office and relay their progress of reducing bottlenecks in the permitting process. Second, an administrator to manage the new National Marine Renewable Energy Center contract. Next, a workforce development program manager to launch the proposed fellowship and internship programs. And finally, an equity and inclusion contractor to develop processes for increasing diversity in staff and funding allocation. You may be asking yourself, what will all these programs cost? The Water Power Research and Development Act allocates 74% of the total funding to marine energy and 26% to hydropower. To prioritize marine energy commercialization in our program, we have budgeted $40 million for developing this new technology. This money will be largely spent on grants to university research centers. The remaining funds are devoted to setting up staff and organizational capacity in the spaces of workforce development, hydropower permitting, and equity and inclusion. The total estimated expense for the WAT program for the first year of enactment is $41 million. Some illustrative indicators for the successful execution of the WAP program's objectives include, for hydropower permitting time, a reduction by 50% from the 2020 baseline. For marine energy commercialization, the procurement of a contract to launch a university research center on the Atlantic coast. For workforce development, an increase in the number of applications to federal water power job openings by 50% from the 2020 baseline. For increased diversity and inclusion in the sector, a target to award 25% of all grants and contracts to entities serving Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. According to the International Panel on Climate Change, the world has 30 years to reach net zero carbon emissions and prevent catastrophic climate change. 182 countries have committed to achieving this goal by signing the Paris Agreement in 2015. As the second largest consumer of fossil fuels, the United States is uniquely positioned to reduce global emissions. Through a large-scale investment in water power technology and training, we can channel our capital, knowledge, and talent towards achieving a just energy transition. I would like to thank the entire team that contributed to this workshop over the past 2 semesters, and especially our advisors, Professor Howard Apson and Professor Lloyd Cass, for their expertise and guidance. Thank you for your attention. We will now take your comments and questions.
Thank you, Anna. Very nice. Excellent job. Stephanie, do we have any raised hands among the group? I see Ariella has raised her hand.
Yes. Ariella, you should be able to unmute now.
Hey, Anna. Thank you for that presentation. That was really interesting. So you briefly mentioned retrofitting, and I was just wondering if you had any idea how much that can actually increase hydropower capacity.
Yes, there have been some assessments made by the Department of Energy that estimate that if we were to retrofit dams that are in disrepair right now, so there are a lot of dams that are just not producing any electric power right now because they have been neglected. If we were to go in and retrofit those dams, they have the capacity to produce 12 gigawatts of electric power. So for reference, the Hoover Dam has a capacity of 2 gigawatts. So it would be like, yeah, creating 6 Hoover Dams.
Okay. Karen, your question. Stephanie, did you unmute her? Okay.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for that presentation. I thought it was really fascinating. I have actually 2-part question. One's related to Ariella's question. First, so I was wondering also about when you retrofit the hydropower dams, did your group look at all at minimizing ecological impacts when upgrading those installations? And my second unrelated question, which is just about the marine energy that you were describing, I thought was so intriguing. And I'm wondering what's the likelihood that this technology will be promoted and funded?
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your first question, with retrofitting, the great thing is that these dams already exist. So if you are not building a new dam, so you are not actually disrupting the environment in that way because the infrastructure is already there. And the other great thing is that in the past 50 years, technology has vastly improved. So these older dams would now be retrofitted with technology that is much more environmentally friendly and better tested. So that's on the hydropower question. On the marine energy question, you know, that's a really interesting, it's an interesting question. You know, it all depends on political will and how much funding we're willing to invest in promoting this new technology.
Okay. Jenny, I think you had a question.
Yeah, great job, Anna. I was just wondering, I know there's a lot of different kinds of water power projects that might be involved in this legislation. Are there any more, like, can you elaborate on examples of potential projects, like where they would be located, if that's something that has already been looked into? I know like there's some Canadian hydropower project that a lot of New York State wants to get in on.
Yeah, Jenny, can you specify what kind of?
What kind of hydro? Well, I guess maybe like the smaller hydropower projects that are using freshwater sources, not, I guess, marine. You know?
Sure. So there are a lot of different projects in development. We actually focused more on marine energy. So as you saw in our presentation, the great majority of our funding is going towards the development of new marine energy technology. So I'm not quite as familiar with proposed new.
Got it.
Okay.
And are there specific marine projects like in the works yet, or no?
There are many that are currently in their pilot phase. There is one in Hawaii that they're actually testing connecting into the mainstream grid. So that's happening on the U.S. Navy base in Hawaii. And then there is a new National Marine Energy Renewable Center that will be launched soon. So that is a very real new thing that's happening. And in addition to being a part of our proposed program, there is that investment being made in new research.
I think we have time for one more question. I thought I saw one in room 407 before. Is that still there? Well, if not, Stephanie, are there any other questions?
Jenny, your hand's still raised. Do you have another one? Oh, there's just went down.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for an excellent set of presentations, and thank you, Anna, for a terrific presentation. So let me just let me offer you some concluding thoughts before we end this workshop. First, we've just seen 5 really excellent presentations where what did we do? We summarized the work of 8 or 9 people over the course of all the months from June till now, working on a single problem, learning about the legislation, learning how to communicate the science of the problem and the solution, presenting all of that work from all of those people in a 10-minute briefing. All of these, one of the things that I've said to my group, and I'll say it to the class, there's an intellectual process that you've learned that you'll be repeating throughout your career, going from a sort of vague policy proposal, now we call it a bill, but whatever it is, to very specific operational tasks with budgets and people broken down into its component parts so we can actually move things and make things happen. And so that process of going from concept and idea to reality is really what this 2-semester workshop's about. It's also about learning how to work in teams, how to work together. Now, this group, unique in the history of this program, has, for the most part, never met each other face to face and done all of this in this technology. And the quality of the work this semester and last semester has been extraordinary. And the quality of your interaction has been extraordinary. And so while none of us wished for this kind of environment, and I certainly hope that someday soon we'll be out of it, you demonstrated your tenacity and your ability in the face of incredible obstacles. And so you're all to be congratulated, the students and faculty that have engaged in this over the past 2 semesters. I'm impressed beyond belief, and people who know me know I'm not easily impressed. So I'm really very, very pleased with the results of this. I had no idea that so much excellent work could be undertaken under these conditions. And so what happens next? Well, next is, believe it or not, this is all preparation for what we're going to do next semester, which is do work for clients pro bono work for as a matter of public service, which is what our program is about. It's about public service and making the world a better place. Now, there'll be no output designs. You have to figure that out with your client. It'll be much less structure, but you have to impose that structure on the project in order to make it happen. And so all the things that we handed you, this output, that output, which you had to work on, you do that next semester with your faculty advisor and client as you design the project. And we call this cutting the problem down to size and turning it into something that's actionable. And that's what this is about, making real change and going from concept to reality. And that's really what I'm looking forward to seeing from this group next semester. So again, congratulations on what was really an excellent 2 semesters of work. And I look forward to seeing the results of what you are able to do with your clients next semester. Congratulations to everybody, and looking forward to moving forward. So have a great rest of your morning, and we'll be talking soon. Take care, everybody.